The cockroach protest, why India's youth are calling themselves cockroaches. Imagine spending years preparing for an exam that could determine your entire future. You wake up early every morning, you study for hours, your parents spend money on coaching, your family makes sacrifices because everyone believes that if you pass, you can finally secure a good life. Then, just when you think you're ready, you discover the exam has been compromised. Questions have allegedly been leaked. The examination is cancelled. And you have to start all over again. For millions of young Indians, this isn't just a hypothetical situation. It has become a symbol of a much bigger problem. And in 2026, that frustration produced one of India's strangest political movements yet. The Cockroach Janta Party. Yes, cockroaches. But behind the bizarre name is a serious story about education, unemployment, economic opportunity, and a generation increasingly worried about its future. And it became so politically significant that India's Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, resigned on July 25, 2026, following weeks of protests and growing pressure over the examination crisis. For protesters, the resignation was a victory. But it also raised a much bigger question. Why had India's young people become angry enough to demand the resignation of a senior government minister? To understand that, we have to start with India's greatest strength, its young population. India is home to more than 1.4 billion people, and hundreds of millions are young. For years, economists have described this as India's demographic dividend. The idea is simple. A country with a huge working-age population has the potential to grow incredibly quickly. More workers, more consumers, more businesses, more innovation. But there's a catch. A young population only becomes a demographic dividend if the economy can provide enough productive opportunities for those young people. And that is where India is struggling. India is one of the world's fastest-growing major economies. Its technology sector is globally competitive, infrastructure has expanded rapidly, and the country has become a major destination for international investment. But economic growth doesn't automatically mean enough good jobs. India's official labor data put youth unemployment at around 9.9% in 2025, with urban youth unemployment considerably higher at 13.6%. And those numbers only tell part of the story. A huge share of India's workers are self-employed or working informally. In 2025, roughly 56% of workers were classified as self-employed, while only around 24% were in regular salaried employment. So the question isn't simply whether Indians are working. It's whether India's economy is creating enough stable, productive, well-paying jobs for an increasingly educated generation. And this is where education comes in. For generations, Indian families have been told that education is the path to upward mobility. Study hard. Get good grades. Go to university. Get a respectable job. Build a better life. For millions of families, government employment became the ultimate version of that dream. Government jobs offer stability, benefits, social status, and importantly, security in a country where private sector employment can be unpredictable. The result is an extraordinary examination culture. Millions of people compete for relatively small numbers of positions. And an entire industry has developed around helping them prepare. Coaching centers, private tutors, online courses, mock exams, student hostels. Entire cities such as Kota have become synonymous with competitive examination preparation. Students can spend years preparing for exams like UPSC, SSC, railway recruitment examinations, state public service examinations, and medical entrance exams. The pressure is enormous. Because when the competition is this intense, the integrity of the examination becomes everything. If you fail fairly, you can accept it. But if you lose your opportunity because the system itself failed, the anger is very different. That is why examination scandals have become such a sensitive political issue in India. Over the years, India has experienced repeated controversies involving paper leaks, recruitment delays, cancelled examinations, and questions over examination security. The problem became particularly explosive around NEET, India's National Medical Entrance Examination. In 2026, roughly 2 million students sat for NEET, competing for approximately 130,000 medical seats. That means the vast majority of candidates were never going to get a place. Students therefore spend years preparing for an exam where the odds are already incredibly difficult. Now imagine being told that the exam itself has been compromised. For students and their families, the issue isn't just academic. It can mean wasted years, lost money, and, because many examinations have age limits, potentially losing the opportunity altogether. This is why the protests became bigger than one examination. They became about trust. Trust that the system is fair. Trust that merit matters. Trust that hard work will actually lead somewhere. And then came the cockroach. The term became associated with the online movement, and instead of rejecting the insult, young activists embraced it. A cockroach is small, unwanted, difficult to eliminate. But it also survives. It adapts. It keeps coming back. The protesters turned that image into a symbol of resilience. The Cockroach Janata Party was also a parody of India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party. And that tells you something about this generation. This wasn't traditional political mobilization. It was internet culture turning into political activism. Memes became slogans. Satire became protest. And social media allowed frustration that had previously existed in isolated communities to become a national conversation. Eventually, the protests reached Delhi. Thousands gathered and demanded reforms to India's examination system. But one demand became particularly important. Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan must resign. The government announced reforms and promised stronger action against examination fraud. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also addressed the issue. But protesters wanted accountability, not simply promises. On July 20, tens of thousands attempted to march towards Parliament. Police intervened, and the confrontation attracted national attention. Then 5 days later, Pradhan resigned. For the protesters, it was proof that their pressure had worked. For the government, it was an attempt to contain a growing political crisis. And for India, it exposed something much bigger. Because replacing an education minister doesn't solve the underlying problem. It doesn't create more jobs. It doesn't eliminate paper leaks. It doesn't make universities automatically produce employable graduates. And it doesn't answer the fundamental question facing India's young population. What kind of future is waiting for them? That is the real story behind the cockroach protest. It isn't really about cockroaches. It is about a generation that was told education would create opportunity and is increasingly asking what happens when the opportunities aren't there. And to understand why that frustration is becoming so powerful, we need to look at India's economic transformation and the uncomfortable reality of jobless growth. That is where the story gets much bigger.